Hello, everyone, and welcome to the very last presentation of the whole conference. Before I start to talk about the survey mentioned in the title, I would like to give some context to understand my final thoughts. First of all, I would like to destroy some myths around the FCI because it's important to understand. Based on my general experience, what I see and what I read, and actually during this conference, I checked the questions and the opinions in the Q&A section. It really seems like as if the FCI were a superpower organization which has worldwide power to interfere with legislations, and it is duty to solve dog-related matters. Even for, in many cases, I hear that crossbred-related matters are the topic for the FCI, because the FCI is the worldwide dog organization, and actually all of these are not true. These are incorrect. Just to show really briefly the major concept of the structure and operation of the FCI, just think about people related to a certain breed. They team up together and they form legally a breed club. And other people connected to the same, to a different breed, they do the same. And they team up together and they create a kennel club, and it happens in many parts of the world. And when these kennel clubs become a member of the FCI, they are named national canine organizations, because it is not true that all kennel clubs are members of the FCI or has anything to do with the FCI. And the biggest power in decisions belongs to the FCI General Assembly. So we can say that all national canine organization can delegate one person to the assembly, and they make the big decisions. For instance, they elect the FCI president, the general committee members, the members of the mandatory commission. There are non-mandatory commissions. We have the FCI head office, and we have the geographical sections as well. So it has a structure. It is not an authority. It's a not-for-profit organization, and it can have activities within its own scope. So it cannot do miracles. And Dr. Thomas Jackel mentioned the distribution report, where we calculated that the pedigree dogs in the EU is not more than 14%. This data goes back to 2022. Sadly, we don't have the overall population figures. It is almost impossible to have that number. So we calculated that data, and we also calculated, based on the FEDIAF data, the tendencies. And as we already heard in various presentations, that the whole population of dogs is increasing. We have a drastic decline in the number of dogs with an FCI pedigree. And we started to calculate these figures during a time when in many European countries, luckily not all of them, but in some countries, there was a very, very strong kind of approach that regulating breeding would solve the various dog welfare problems, for instance, mostly health problems, but in many cases you can hear that regulating breeding is necessary to reduce behavioral problems as well. This is an utterly oversimplified concept, in my opinion, especially because the registered population of dogs is too small, and law enforcement is almost ineffective. And there are a lot of other elements in this whole situation that affects and escalates dog welfare problems, and this should be also examined and taken into consideration. And then came the idea that let's make a survey with the national canine organizations, not just in the EU, but just to have a general idea about the situation. And I want to share some thoughts on these elements affecting dog welfare in general. First of all, we here in Europe, especially in the European Union, especially in certain countries, we repeatedly hear that breeding this type of dogs, breeding this exact breeds or this group of people should be regulated. So we have the breeders, and yes, good breeding practices are necessary. We just heard two presentations related to health and for behavior. It is necessary to have a good standard in this activity. We have, of course, we have law. We have regulations controlling, but we also need law enforcement, law implementation and law enforcement. It is not enough just to write down something and waiting for a huge and drastic change overnight. Regulations are not a book of spells, magic spells. So you need implementation and law enforcement. I think it is really, really crucial to understand the importance of technology, the different social media channels, its impact, and the different coded chat services like Telegram, Signal, WhatsApp, and Viber all take a huge part, for example, in the illegal trade. And we many cases forget about to talk to dog keepers. And it is a very important part, and I will mention some ideas a bit later. And you can say that these are the major pillars, but there are many other elements within a society that contribute to the level, to the standard of dog welfare and the sort of problems that are to be solved. For example, economy status. If there is poverty, that will increase, for instance, breeding dogs just for profit. And when I talk about the importance of the citizens, the pet buyers, the pet keepers, it is really important to understand that in each society, we have the written rules and we have the unwritten rules. The unwritten rules are the social norms. What is accepted by the society and it is not codified in law, and what are banned, which is absolutely not acceptable. Not because there will be sanctions by the authorities, but because it is not what we do, and this is not how we do. As and it's really important that these two are interconnected. And as I mentioned, written rules are incapable of having any kind of effect without effective law enforcement. And I put here some questions related to the unwritten rules, the social norms. And this presentation is not about this, but we could talk about this for a whole day, that why someone decides to keep a dog and without, for example, any knowledge on how to raise, how to properly care about the dog, why people choose that dog from that source, why they go to, for example, eBay or any other services and buy a dog there, and the dog get delivered in a parking lot somewhere in the evening. What are the decision-making patterns in humans? What does it mean to be a responsible dog owner? What is the level of responsibility they have to fulfill when we can say that, yes, everything is okay with the dog? So it would be really important, in my opinion, to cover the human side, the decisions, why we decide that way. And in many approaches, it is completely missed. We always think that we humans, as individuals and as a whole society, are always rational, making rational decisions, but this is not true. We are not that rational. And it is also important to understand the nature of welfare issues. In many cases, these are interconnected, creating a chain of events. For instance, I buy a dog from the internet. I buy a really fancy designer dog. I take it from the breeder at a parking lot. It develops health problems or behavioral problems. I beat up the dog, for instance, for the behavioral problems. So these things are interconnected. So it is a very, very complex complex matter. And these are influenced by various elements. And to find a solution, you must understand these roots and you must influence these elements. Otherwise, it will not be effective. The solution will not be effective. And let's talk about a bit about the story of the survey. Really, we wanted just to ask the NCOs, the kennel clubs, which are members of the FCI, about their structures, the structure of their inner policies, because, for instance, in many countries, the breeding regulations are created by the breed clubs, or in certain countries, even the breed clubs register the puppies and issue the pedigrees. We asked the perceived welfare matters. We asked for the media covers. So we wanted to compare the problems according to the kennel club and the problems according to the general public. We wanted to have an idea about the common dog purchase channels, and we were really, really interested in the legal background, the implementation, and the effectiveness of law enforcement. And of course, this is a survey. This is not a scientific paper. First, and there are limitations. Not all NCOs participated. Not all kennel clubs filled out this survey. And even if they filled it out, they did not answer to all of the questions. And there are certain questions, especially on the effectiveness of law or law enforcement. These are the perceptions of the kennel club, and these are subjective opinions. These are not measured data. So this survey, the results of the survey, which has not been published yet, is not, I wouldn't say not complete. It will be complete, but this could be much detailed. And I would really love to see in certain countries that people would start to analyze their own data, their local data, based on the concept of this survey. And these were the participating countries. We had 19 countries, 19 national canine organizations from the European Union. And as I said, we asked everyone, all the members of the FCI, but because this presentation is focusing on the EU and the illegal puppy trade, I just want to highlight some relevant findings which really contribute to understanding the whole situation. First of all, it's a really, really interesting and really important question, because even breeders who have an FCI registered kennel name get surprised that there are other organizations issuing pedigrees for dogs. And there is this misconception that the FCI issues pedigrees for all purebred dogs or purebred looking dogs. And it is not true. The FCI does not have a monopolistic role. And we asked in the survey, are there any other organizations doing the activity like the National Canine Organization does? And yes, in 14 countries, there are other organizations. And I put here an extra third. I call these services pedigree printing services. There are websites. You go there, you add the female and the male dog name, and you pay with PayPal 30, 40, 50 euros, and they will send you a printed or a PDF pedigree saying that, okay, your dog now has a pedigree. There are these services as well. We asked about the general legal requirements related to dog reproduction. 6 countries said that they have no specific legal requirements related to how or under what conditions dogs get born. And 13 countries said that, yes, they have this. we asked that in general, that what is true related to these regulations, and 8 countries said that these are minimum requirements that cover the principles without implementation, and 6 countries said that these regulations deeply cover the breeding requirements, and the mandatory implementation is really, really effective. So it makes sense. In the other countries, it is not that effective. We asked the same related to the implementation of law and the law enforcement. As I said, simply just putting a wording into a regulation is not enough. You need to implement it, and you need to sanction, and not just sanction. You need to be able to recognize that, okay, there it is something wrong. And 10 countries out of the 19 said that law enforcement is only effective in the case of registered breeding. If a breeding establishment or someone is off the radar of the authorities, it will be impossible to track down and to check if everything is okay there. And we mentioned the definitions, and we talked about puppy farms and when it is illegal, when it is not legal. And the commercial breeding facilities are always, not always, but often forgotten. And these are the facilities which really, really produce dogs in big numbers. It does not make them illegal. The question is, when is something illegal? It is illegal when it is against the law. So we asked whether it is legal or illegal in these countries to run a commercial breeding facility. 4 countries said, no, it's banned. 6 countries said that, yes, it is okay to run a commercial breeding facility. And what is really, really dangerous, that in 8 countries, it's a complete legal gray zone. You cannot say that it is banned or not banned. So if I go to any of these countries, I buy a property and I start to produce 400 dogs during a year, no one will tell me exactly that it is against the law or not. And we also asked the experience of the national canine organizations, and where it is banned, the number is limited. In other countries, there are effective law enforcement, the authorities checking. And in those countries where it is allowed or it is not clear, because it's a gray zone, the legislation covers only minimum standards. These facilities must register their dogs. Only 3 countries said that there are strict regulations, and in 1 country, the authority visits these facilities, these puppy farms, annually. And we asked about if there is any regulations targeting the import of puppies through the illegal puppy trade channels, meaning that is this topic itself is a matter for the decision makers in the country. And what we found, that 7 countries out of 17, the decision makers did not try or planned so far to solve this problem through legislation. And even in those 10 countries, they said, the National Canine Organization said that these are not really effective. We asked the same about the national illegal puppy farms. What's the situation with them? Are the legislations? And 8 out of 17 countries said that no, they have no exact legislation in the country to target this kind of facilities. And even if they had, they said that, okay, it is written down in the law, but the implementation and the law enforcement is not effective enough to have any kind of proper change. And the big question is, it's not really connected directly to the illegal puppy trade, but it directly is connected to many welfare problems that whether a puppy owner is aware of keeping a dog properly. Is there any kind of certification, or I can decide to start to keep a dog tomorrow without any kind of background knowledge? And in the majority of the countries, there is no such legislation. In many cases, you can see that there are loopholes. They have the regulation, but no effective control, etc., etc., etc. And we also ask the identification and registration process if it's mandatory or not. It is mandatory in many countries, but in many cases it is insufficient. It is, I think it is a strange situation. In one country, they indicated that unique identification is compulsory. However, there is no national registry to look up dogs. I don't really see what's the point in that. Maybe there is something, but it perfectly shows that the identification and tracking back these dogs to their owners or their breeding facility is not really a closed system. We asked about how people purchase their dogs. Physical marketplaces is a strange place to buy dogs. So I go there to buy cabbage for the lunch during the weekend. Am I allowed to buy a dog at such a physical marketplace? And yes, in 5 countries it is allowed with minimal standards. So this is not regulated everywhere in the continent. We asked about pet shops. Pet shops is itself a really arguable topic because in many perspectives, in my opinion, and according to some scientific papers, it is not the best set for a puppy to start a life in a pet shop. Lack of stimuli, etc., etc. In 4 countries, it is still allowed. And the law enforcement and its effectiveness and the legal background on its own is absolutely changing. There is one country where there is no specific regulation on pet shops, and we are talking about the EU. And we've heard about it a lot of time. It causes a lot of trouble about selling dogs and buying dogs online, on websites and social media. It is, as you expect, probably, it is not really regulated, and it is not easy to regulate it at all. Even if there are regulations, it is, I think it's almost impossible currently to have strong and effective law enforcement and implementation together. And I deliberately wanted to put this question into the survey to see that whether in that country is it okay to sell dogs on websites, local or international websites like eBay, where people go and buy a used electronic screwdriver or their new pair of jeans, etc., etc. Is it okay for the people to go there and buy the new member of the family? And in 4 countries, it is not allowed to have this kind of things. In 12 countries, it is allowed with not really specific regulations. No, even they have specific regulations. No specific regulations. Or even if they have regulations, these are minimum standards. Only one country said that these regulations are strict and the law enforcement is also good. And as previously mentioned, that's all I wanted to highlight. These findings, it is interesting. It will be published during spring, and I definitely want to recommend this report from FOPOS. It is really valuable, especially to understand the purchasing patterns. How we buy, how people think it is okay to really purchase a new family member, and to see the loopholes, the gray zones, the black holes in the legislative system within the national regulation, because yes, we will have an EU level legislation, but still it doesn't mean that the national governments should forget about implementing and creating a system that works. And why is it important to understand? I mentioned at the very beginning of my presentation that the goal of this whole survey and the report that will be published is to highlight patterns, to highlight the different elements contributing to dog welfare problems and to the illegal puppy trade as well. Here is an example, a real example. Probably everyone knows about that in the Netherlands in 2019, the government banned to breed brachycephalic dogs with too short muzzles. And it was a decision really welcomed by internationally by animal welfare organizations. For other organizations, I repeatedly hear that this is the example to be followed. And it was followed in Norway, for instance, and we can hear it many cases that let's do this. It was in 2019. This is an article from 2023. There was a debate and a planned ban on owning these dogs completely. I haven't completed a complete research. I haven't interviewed people. I just checked what is online to read articles. I just read articles. And it is a question whether it is okay for the whole society to completely ban owning these dogs, or will the politicians lose voters? Will it be a huge scandal, or what to do with those dogs which are already there? What to do with smuggled dogs if ownership is banned? What to do with these dogs? And probably it was not solved in 2023 because 1.5 years later, then came another article stating that vets in the Netherlands urge people to stop the illegal breeding of flat-faced dog breeds in the country. So it has not solved the problem. And during the same time, in October 2024, a political party, they approved a notion. They want the legislation still on the topic of owning brachycephalic dogs 6 years after the ban of breeding. They had to admit that it was not, I wouldn't say they admitted, they just stated that it solved nothing. 6 years later, dogs through legal channels from Belgium and other EU member states, and from illegal breeding facilities without any control within the Netherlands and probably other parts of the Europe, go to the country, and these dogs are still there, probably in bad health condition, many of them. And I mentioned, and Dr. Tamás Jakkel mentioned, the distribution report. When we published the distribution report, actually it was in 2020, the main trigger to calculate the distribution of the FCI registered pedigree dogs was to show that a breed-specific or a breeder-specific ban will not solve such welfare issues like the health state of the brachycephalic dogs, and it will just trigger illegal puppy farms and the illegal trade. And back in those days when we published the distribution report, we also published this writing on the consequences of breed-specific legislation, calling attention that this will not be the solution. It's on the FCI website. And there is a semantic problem. And it repeatedly occurred during this conference. What is the definition of breeding dogs? What is a puppy farm, when it is illegal, and who are the breeders? And the problem is that we use, and this is the problem of the language, of the English language, I think. I don't know what is the situation with other languages, but we use one word for the whole broad spectrum. When someone is running an illegal puppy farm in very, very horrific conditions, that person is breeding dogs. But if someone spends thousands of euros a year to maintain the health of the litters at his kennel, that person is always is also breeding. We use the same word, and we try to add additional adjectives: responsible, irresponsible, legal, illegal, but we don't have a uniform definitions for labeling these different kind of sources. But on the other hand, when we talk about, especially from a legislative perspective, or not a legislative, from the media or from general perspective, when we generally talk about breeders and breeding, the general people and media always associate breeding and breeders to the registered kennel breeders. When I looked up the materials related to the situation with the brachycephalic dogs in the Netherlands, there are interviews with the Dutch Kennel Club, which is a member of the FCI, but I haven't seen any interviews with the other organizations issuing pedigrees or the puppy farms. According to this survey, I checked this, these are allowed. There are other organizations, but all the time when it is about breeding, everyone associates to registered kennels. And because people don't know that the FCI does not have a monopolistic role in the dog world, they think that, okay, it is always an FCI registered kennel. And let me add one question just to show this semantic problem, that when I have a litter of puppies which are crossbred dogs, are these dogs bred? Am I a breeder, or what to do? How to frame this whole situation? And just to sum up, why this survey is important to why we wanted to this, and why it is important to understand all these things. And it is related to the illegal puppy trade directly and indirectly. In some countries, let's say some countries, there is a certain kind of animal welfare approach to address the welfare problems, mostly in health and in behavior. But these initiatives focus exclusively on a tiny segment, and the invisible 86% of dog population should be handled as well, because these are off the radar, and it is really, really impossible to implement law enforcement effectively. It looks really good in campaigns and legislations to use such strong associated terms like "I ban this" for the sake of the dogs. But in many cases, it is impossible to implement these requirements, because we should understand the original root causes of these problems, which will not be handled, and they will escalate these problems further. And meanwhile, it will increase the unregistered population. That's why I use the Netherlands as an example, and I'm sure we have similar situation in Norway. And it would be really important to understand this, to learn that this kind of breed-specific legislation is ineffective, in certain cases counterproductive. Some of us, not just the FCI, other organizations also highlighted that will be the consequence. It will just increase the illegal puppy trade. And despite the good intention, there is a responsibility attached to these consequences. And closing thoughts, the way we see animal welfare problems and their solutions, in my opinion, is utterly oversimplified. I put here an example here. If you are involved in the topic, you know what a BOAS test is. It is used in many uh, national canine organizations related to the FCI to test the brachycephalic dogs, and the breeders plan their breeding actions in accordance. There are debates that why the FCI registered breeders use this graded dog and that graded dog, and this shows that we are discussing something which is, I wouldn't say irrelevant, but seriously, the internet, the different social media platforms are full of designer Frenchies with fluffy coat, with no coat, with really horrific conditions. They will never be BOAS tested. So we should understand this. And not all factors, when we tailor an animal welfare solution for these problems, not all factors are considered. Not all factors are considered as something to be targeted. In many cases, many things are socially accepted. It is socially accepted to buy a dog on Instagram. It is not too good. So a holistic framework should be important to solve these problems. And it would be really, really important. It's another topic that when and how legislation can work and how it can be effective, because it will not solve everything, because it has its own limitation. And social norms should be modified, should be altered, because human nature and human behavior takes a significant part in this. That's why education is vital, but it is not that easy than creating a law and to ban something. It takes time and not that visible. And it is a bad. It was mentioned. I'm really happy that in presentations it was mentioned that the new EU regulation, for instance, favors for the reputation of the responsible breeders, because it is kind of unfair. It is legal but unfair that if you are a breeder, you pay money for the vet, for this and that. You pay a fortune to have a good quality of litters of puppies. And if you live in a country where it is where being a breeder is a stigmatizing thing, then you will always hear that these breeders are responsible for the health problems, the welfare problems of dogs. So you will have a very bad reputation no matter what you do. And meanwhile, those people operating the illegal puppy trade system, the overall system, they will remain untouched because law enforcement is impossible. So it's not good. And please keep in mind that any change, especially through law or changing the social norms, takes times, takes years, or takes decades. And it would be really, really important that while we intend to solve the current problems, do not exaggerate the already existing problems, because it is really important to see strategically. And the report will be published soon on the FCI website, hopefully during springtime. And as a final idea, I would like to put this here. Besides, I'm really thankful for your attention. Demand defines supply. This is the golden rule. It should not be forgotten. As I usually say, people don't buy, for instance, flat-faced dogs, flat-faced French bulldogs, for instance, because these are the only dogs available on the market, and let's ban breeding these dogs and it will solve the problem. No, people buy these type of dogs because they want to buy this kind of dogs. So we will need a bit complex approach to maintain a healthy population of these dogs. Thank you again for the attention. And I would like to, and I want to thank for all the fellow speakers for accepting the invitation for this conference. I'm really grateful for that. Thank you.